and finally say a few words about why you might consider studying philosophy and perhaps even majoring in it. So first off, what is philosophy? What is philosophy? In Singapore, actually, in a certain number of JCs, there are philosophy courses, and so I do get a certain number of students who have some background in philosophy, even entering NUS, but most people really haven't encountered it. So I'm going to start off by giving you kind of a rough working definition of the discipline. Philosophy, well, at least I think of it as the search for answers to important questions that interest us, but questions that can't be settled by science. At least they can't be entirely settled by science, either by natural science or by social science. And so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to just go through a number of examples of the kinds of questions that philosophers ask and try to answer, just to give you a feel for the discipline and both the variety within the discipline and the flavor of each area. So to begin with, let's look at ethical questions. One major area of philosophy and one major area of research in the philosophy department here at NUS is in moral philosophy or ethics. And so the kinds of questions that we raise when we're studying ethics are, for example, well, here's a pretty big one. Do we have a moral obligation, some kind of a duty, to help those in need? Right? It's a pretty simple question. I think that most of us, on some level, we do feel that we have some such obligation. And in some cases, I think that we can all agree that the obligation is quite clear and obvious. All right. So just to have an example here, imagine that. Come on in. Imagine that. Well, I'll use myself as the example. Imagine that one day I'm walking home from work, say. I pass a public swimming pool, and just as I'm passing by the pool, I see a small child fall into the pool. Okay, so a little baby. Now it's just me and the baby. There's nobody else around. I don't know where the baby's parents are. Okay. In any event, so here I am. I see this baby fall into the pool. It's quite clear to me that if I don't act immediately, jumping into the pool and pulling the baby out, that the baby will drown. The baby will die. Okay. So now, who in this case would agree that I have a moral obligation to save the baby? That it would be very bad of me not to save the baby. Let me put it the other way. Who thinks it's okay if I don't save the baby? Okay, nobody. All right. Okay. Let's change the example a little bit. Suppose that I don't know. I'm wearing my best suit. It's my best suit of clothes. I'm wearing a fancy watch. My pockets are full of all my fancy gadgets and electronics. Now, I don't have time to take off my suit or even empty my pockets, okay, and take off my watch if I'm going to save this child. And so if I jump into the pool now, I'm going to ruin my suit, spoil all my gadgets and so forth. It's going to cost me, say, $1,000 to replace all that stuff, okay. And now, so bearing that in mind, I'm like, well, nah, I just decide to walk home. I'll let the baby drown. Now, in this case, do I behave in a morally acceptable manner? Who here thinks that I do, that my behavior is okay? Right? Who thinks that my behavior is morally monstrous? It's okay, I can take it. Yeah. I think that I would be behaving very badly in this case as well. Okay, well, suppose let's raise the ante. Let's suppose that it's not just a fancy suit and a cell phone and a watch that are at stake here. Suppose that the reason why I'm kind of rushing past this swimming pool is that I have a winning lottery ticket. But it's a kind of a time-sensitive thing, so I've got to make it to the Singapore Pools Claim Center within the next 15 minutes, all right, to claim my prize. It's $100,000, right? And so I'm really excited, and I'm rushing to the claim center, and I see the kid fall in, like, if I stop to save the kid, there's no way I'm going to make the deadline. I'm going to give him $100,000. And so I look at the kid, and sorry, kid, it's $100,000. And I keep on going to the claim center. Now, in this case, is what I did okay. $100,000 at stake. Anybody think it's okay in this case? Okay, yeah. So it seems that in this case we have a very strong sense that we do have some kind of a duty, some kind of a moral obligation to help those in need. In this case, a baby. Okay, so this is so far I think pretty uncontroversial. But now where a demand for philosophical thinking comes in is when we juxtapose this case with another case that on the surface might seem to be entirely different, but upon further consideration looks to be not quite so different at all. Here's another baby. This baby is somewhere in Africa. This baby is is dying of malaria, essentially. Actually, this baby is probably already dead. Picture was taken some time ago. So this baby here, when this picture was taken, suffering from malaria, as thousands upon thousands of children in impoverished parts of the world do. And the baby, what the baby needs, okay, to get better is medicine. It needs some anti-malaria medicine, and the medicine that it would cost to save this baby's life, take about $10, 10 sing, 20 sing maybe, of medicine to save the baby. Of course, this baby is nowhere near me. Here, I live in Singapore. The baby is somewhere in the Congo or something. Okay, so I can't directly intervene to save this child's life. But of course, there is a sense in which I could save this child's life, or if not the life of this child, the life of some entirely similar child. Right? There are, after all, international relief organizations that are geared towards providing basic health services and medicines to these very poor parts of the world. Right? We know of UNICEF, Doctors Without Borders. There are all kinds of them. Okay, and so I know that if I donated, say, $1,000 to one of these relief organizations, it's easy to do. Right? I just take out my wallet, get out my credit card, point my web browser to www.relieforganization.org. Okay, key in my personal particulars, amount to donate, 1,000, click, send, done. Okay, and even if 99.9% of my donation gets eaten up by administrative overhead, that still means $10 gets through to the kid, or some similar kid. The necessary medicine gets through. The child is saved. But now here's the confessional part of the presentation. I don't make such donations. I've never donated $1,000 to an organization like that. Okay, most people will never donate anything to such organizations. Okay, now who thinks that I'm a moral monster for not making a $1,000 donation to one of these organizations? Okay. Well, thanks. Okay. I feel better. All right. But now, well, the thing is, though, if you think about it, right, why do I not incur moral condemnation for failing to send $1,000 to one of these relief organizations, right, when I do incur moral condemnation for failing to save the child in the pool, even though the cost to me is the same in both cases and the results of failing to act are the same? Right? In the swimming pool case, right, it cost me $1,000 to save the child because of all my stuff. Right? In the malaria infected African child's case, it cost me $1,000 in the form of a donation. Right? By failing to jump into the pool, by sparing myself that $1,000 cost in the swimming pool case, the result is the child dies. By failing to make a $1,000 donation to the relief organization, the result, a child dies. So it looks as if, in terms of my behavior and its outcomes, these two cases are equivalent, and yet we have very different moral intuitions about the two cases. In the first case, we're inclined to say that I have a clear and obvious and urgent moral obligation to save the drowning child, whereas in the second case, we think that no, it would be very nice of me to make the donation, that would be laudable, but we don't consider it to be, you don't hold me to any moral obligation to do so. Okay, is this a consistent way to live our lives? Or are we just burying our heads in the sand so we can enjoy our lattes and our fancy clothes and so forth instead of donating to a third world relief? Well, I don't know. I'm not sure, but philosophers are trying to find out. Okay, so that's an example of one kind of question that philosophers ask and attempt to answer. In addition to ethical questions, there are kind of on the opposite end of the philosophical spectrum. We have metaphysical questions. Metaphysics. Metaphysics is something that you don't do a lot of in JC, but if you take philosophy, you will encounter it. So here's just one example of a metaphysical question. This is a metaphysical question that human beings have been asking this question since they were capable of asking questions. Okay, where did the universe come from? Why is there something rather than nothing? Okay. Now today, if you know anything about science, you know that scientists think they can give at least a pretty substantial answer to this question. They say, well, look, the universe came from the Big Bang. We've all heard about the Big Bang, right? So here we are. That's a Hubble Space Telescope. We're in one of these galaxies or something. We have all the various epochs and so on and so forth. But it all started, we're told, with the Big Bang. With the Big Bang. That's where the universe came from. It started with the Big Bang. Okay. Well, if you're like me, even when I was even younger than you, when I was I was an irritating child. I was doomed to become a philosopher from an early age. I would ask my parents, like, well, where did the world come from? And my mother was like, oh, not this again. Okay. And I said, well, and my dad was like, the physicists have found out that it was a big bang. I said, yeah, but why was there a big bang? Why? Why was there a big bang? Okay. And now some people, including some prominent scientists, will tell you that this question is meaningless. That in general, it's meaningless to ask, well, where did the universe come from? And why is it meaningless? Well, you'll be told that, well, it's meaningless because don't you see? If the universe had never come into existence, then you would never have been able to ask why it did, right? So it's only because the thing you're asking about actually happened that you now exist to be able to ask the question. And from that, it's supposed to follow the question itself is somehow meaningless. But when you hear somebody say this, you should resist. This is a bad argument. And to see why it's a bad argument, you can reflect on a parallel case. So, for example, suppose a group of my students are finally so sick of me they decide they can't take it anymore and they're going to murder me. Okay. And so to this end, they spike my afternoon coffee with a massive dose of cyanide. They put enough cyanide in there to kill a horse. Okay. And so I drink my coffee. They're kind of watching around the corner. Okay. I drink my coffee, and miraculously, I suffer no ill effects. For some reason, this huge, should be lethal dose of cyanide just doesn't harm me at all. I mean, to my students' great disappointment. Okay. And so now suppose that at some later time I discover that they tried this, right? I discover that I ingested this massive dose of cyanide without getting sick, much less dying. Now it seems to me that it would be perfectly reasonable for me at this point to ask, well, why didn't I die? Why didn't the cyanide kill me? Right? That seems like a sensible thing for me to ask. Despite the fact that if it had killed me, I wouldn't be around even to ask the question. Okay. So the mere fact that what you're asking about is sort of a necessary condition of your being able to ask about it doesn't mean that your question is meaningless. Okay. Now another somewhat more sophisticated and I think more interesting reason to suppose that this sort of question about, well, where did the universe come from is kind of a meaningless question in some sense. Some scientists will tell you, and even some philosophers, well, look, the Big Bang wasn't just the beginning of matter and energy. The Big Bang was the beginning of time and space. Focus on time. Okay. So before the Big Bang, there was no time. That was the birth not only of the things that happen in time, but of time itself. But if that's true, right, then if you're asking, well, where did the universe come from? What caused the Big Bang? Well, if you're asking about that, then you're going to be asking about, well, what happened before time? Right? But that doesn't make sense, right? Because if something happens before time, it happens earlier than time. But if it happens earlier than time, then it happens earlier in time than time. Aha, but then it must be in time. Okay, if you didn't follow that, don't worry. That's like third year stuff. In any event, you can see that there's kind of a niggling paradox about, well, how can something have brought the universe into existence, given that time itself originates at this singular moment, the Big Bang? Well, many philosophers are unfazed by this. They'll say, well, granted, let's suppose that time itself begins with this event, the Big Bang. That just goes to show that if something does explain why the Big Bang occurred, this something, this whatever it is that explains the Big Bang, that brought about the Big Bang, must be something that, in some sense, transcends time. Okay, and this idea is central to a very ancient and recurring line of reasoning in support of some kind of broadly theistic standpoint, according to which the universe was brought into being by some being, force, something that lies in some sense beyond space and time. Okay, this is, for those of you who have studied this a little bit, this is the famous cosmological argument. Okay, so that's an example of a metaphysical question. Okay. Just from these two examples, you can see that philosophy is really a major grab bag of topics. So you can be talking about ethics, you can be talking about the origins of the universe. Philosophers also like to discuss political questions. The philosophy department at NUS has a particular strength in political philosophy. Questions such as, for example, do the interests of the many outweigh the interests of the few? The interests of the many outweigh the interests of the few. And you might think that, well, look, the idea that the interests of the many do outweigh the interests of the few. It's the cornerstone of the whole democratic system, right? The whole concept of democracy here seems to be predicated on the principle that, yes, that the interests of the many outweigh the interests of the few. After all, everybody gets one vote. Every person gets one vote, right? Every person's interests count the same as every other person's interests. And so if most people's interests go this way, well, then the total amount of interest should go that way too. And to try to sort of get clear on the truth of this, or whether it is true, philosophers, they like to engage in thought experiments. This is a favorite pastime of philosophers, thought experiments. And so there's some famous thought experiments involving trolleys. I don't know if you can read the cartoon here. I'm not going to read it for you. I'll just kind of walk you through the reasoning here. So the idea here is that you've got sort of a railroad track, and it's split, and a trolley's coming along the rail here. And it's set to go straight and run over these 4 people, okay, and squash them to death. All right. Now, there's a little control knob here, and here you are, okay, and you can control the direction. So you can, if you don't do anything, then the trolley's just going to keep on going straight and squash these 4. But if you throw the switch, then the trolley will get sidetracked over here, and it'll squash this one guy. Okay. All right. So there you are. You're looking at this this horrible scene unfolding. You're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? And so you say, well, look, well, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Divert the trolley, and so we're saved. Oh no, I'm being sacrificed for the greater good. Okay, anyhow, it gets a little bit gruesome there. Yay, why? Well, because one person dies, but the other 4 live. And so in this case, I mean, you would hate to find yourself in that situation where you're the one who had to do this, right? This poor guy's saying, no, please don't do it. You're like, well, sorry, but but in any event, I think most people think that, well, certainly you can't blame the person here for diverting the trolley, right? Given that by doing so, he saved, well, I guess a net of 3 lives, okay? So he saved lives by doing that. Yes, lives were lost, but even more lives were saved. And so it seems like we might even praise him for diverting the trolley, but certainly we would not condemn him, okay? By contrast, I mean, imagine if the trolley was originally heading down this track here with the one guy on it, and then he diverted it to the one with the 4 people on it. We say, you're sick, you're a murderer. Okay. So you look at this kind of case, it seems like, yeah, this tends to reinforce this idea that I think many of us just have, as a matter of course, that yes, indeed, the needs of the many, okay, the interests of the many outweigh the interests of the few. But now, when things become interesting and when a demand for philosophy arises is when you contrast this case with a similar case concerning which we have somewhat different opinions. At least many people have different opinions. So in this situation, you're standing by a simple single track. There's no branching involved in this case. And you're standing next to it, and there's some guy, I don't know, maybe you know, maybe you don't, a great big fat guy. Okay, I don't know, maybe your friend is like a junior sumo wrestler or something. Okay. All right, it's not your friend, it's just some other bystander. All right. And here comes the trolley again, and these poor 4 people on the rail, on the track, and they're going to get squashed if nothing happens. But, I don't know, maybe you're a math whiz or a physics guru, and you quickly do some calculations, and you figure, wait a second, if this fat guy were on the tracks, he has just enough mass to stop the trolley, okay, to maybe derail the trolley. And so he will be killed, okay, but at least these 4 people will be saved. And so you give him the old heave-ho. Say, sorry, buddy, and you push the fat guy onto the tracks, and he gets run over by the trolley. The trolley screeches to a halt just before it reaches these guys. So who in this, I'm genuinely curious, who thinks that in this case it's okay to push the fat guy onto the rails? Okay. Oh, but you're already a philosopher, so you've been poisoned. Who here thinks that it would be wrong to push the fat guy in front of the train? All right. Okay. Now, and if you really want to make it radical, I mean, imagine that you are the fat guy. Right? Here I am. It's just trolley, me, big fat guy, and these 4 people. I'm like, well, look, if the interests of the many outweigh the interests of the few, they're many, I'm few. Shouldn't I lay down on the tracks? All right. So who here would feel obligated to lay down on the tracks in this case? 1 person, 2 people. Huh. Well, maybe we can go out and test that later on now. Yeah, so at the very least, I think we can say that, yes, people's reaction to this case is far less sort of firm, okay, more equivocal than in the former case. In this case, we think, well, look, there's something wrong about just throwing a guy in front of a train, knowing that he's going to be killed as a result, even if it means saving these 4 people over here. Okay? But once again, if you compare this case and the previous case, in all important details, they seem to be identical, right? In this case, it's either one person's going to die or 4 people are going to die. In this case, it's either one person's going to die or 4 people are going to die. Okay? In neither case does this person want to die. Okay? All right? So, and in either case, if you do nothing in this case, these 4 people die. If you do nothing in this case, these 4 people die. So it looks like the outcome is the same in either case, and yet we think that in this case, there seems to be something wrong with pushing a guy in front of a train, even if it's for the sake of saving some lives. Whereas we don't think there's anything wrong with diverting the train itself. So what gives? This kind of example suggests to many philosophers that, well, maybe we have to be a little bit more circumspect in our political thinking, in our political theorizing, and thinking about what the best way to organize a community or a state, okay, is. Maybe we can't just simple-mindedly always assume that the interests of the many outweigh the interests of the few. Maybe there are some limits. Maybe there's some limits to how far that we can apply that principle without stepping the bounds of reasonable political life. And so a lot of philosophers set themselves the task of finding those limits, of discovering and defining and articulating those limits, the lines that you're not allowed to cross, right, that you shouldn't cross in pursuing the fulfillment of the interests of the many, okay, at the expense of the interests of the few. So political philosophy discusses this sort of example, but usually without the cartoons. Okay. And the last set of questions that I'd like to present for your consideration are questions about human nature. Human nature. People who work in the philosophy of mind spend a lot of time thinking about human nature. Also, people who do moral philosophy think about human nature. Are human beings intrinsically good? Are they intrinsically evil? Or are they just hungry? Okay. Well, here's one very basic question about human nature, a question that has really become, in a way, sort of sharper, or at least more urgent, in the last couple of 100 years, with the emergence and ascendancy of natural science. Do we, human beings, people sitting in this room, do we have genuine freedom of will? Right? We all kind of feel like we do. You feel like it's up to you what decision you make in many junctures in your life. You feel like you're in control. Sometimes you feel like you're not in control, but very often you feel like you are in control. Okay, at least on a limited level. You can decide whether to turn left or right, whether to order, I don't know, Coke or 7-Up. Okay, so many of us take ourselves to have genuine freedom of will, but when you try to reconcile this idea that you are a truly free agent operating in the world with a broadly scientific worldview, you find that, well, it's not so easy. Here's an example, another thought experiment for you. Suppose that you go over to our arts canteen and you decide you're going to get a plate of fruit. We have a nice fruit stall over there. I highly recommend it. So you get your plate of fruit, and you go back to your table. You set the fruit down, and then you realize, no, I also wanted, I wanted maybe a strawberry milkshake or something. Okay, so you leave your fruit on the table, you just scurry back to the juice stall is right next to the fruit stall. In fact, I think it's the same stall. Anyhow, you get your strawberry milkshake, and you come back to your table. Finally, you can sit down, relax, you can eat your fruit, only to find a bird eating your fruit. Okay. Now, if you've actually been to our arts canteen, you'll know that this is not a totally sort of fictional scenario here. The thing is just rife with birds. It's okay. In any event, so that's the situation. You come back and there's a bird finishing up the last of your fruit. Well, how do you react in this situation? How do you react? How would you react? I mean, I think I would react. I would be annoyed, right? Inconvenienced. I kind of kind of shoo the bird away. Okay. So I have various negative kind of feelings, but one thing that I don't think that I would feel, I wouldn't feel like a sense of moral outrage, right? I wouldn't like condemn the bird. I would like, damn thee, cursed bird. No, I wouldn't be like that. It was like, oh, this is annoying. Get away. Okay. And so I wouldn't blame the bird, right? I wouldn't hold the bird morally responsible. I mean, after all I know, it's just a bird. It's acting on its instincts. It was born programmed with certain instincts. It desires fruit, right? And it just, when it sees fruit, it goes for it. So the bird had no say over its instincts. It didn't choose to be born with the instincts it had. Right? It didn't choose to be a bird. All right? And so how can I blame the bird for eating my fruit? Okay. All right. But now, suppose again, let's look at a slightly different scenario here. Once again, you got your fruit from the fruit stall. You take it back to your table. You set it down. You realize, aha, I forgot I wanted a strawberry milkshake also. So you go back, you get your milkshake, and you come back to your table again where you find your fruit. Well, it's not being eaten by a bird in this scenario. In this scenario, you find another student eating your fruit. Okay, now no student at NUS would possibly do this. So I don't know, maybe it's like an exchange student or something. We don't have to sort of inquire into the details. Okay. But in this case, you find another student, a student just like unabashedly just like shoveling your fruit down. Now, how do you react in this situation? In this case? Well, in this case, maybe moral outrage would be a bit sort of strong, but you would certainly feel more than just like inconvenienced. You'd be angry, right? You'd go, what are you doing? That's my fruit. You would have some sort of negative moral feelings, negative sentiments towards this individual. Okay, now maybe it turns out it's a simple misunderstanding. This person happened to set his fruit down on the table adjacent to yours. It's just a simple mix-up. Okay, in that case, no hard feelings. But if the student, this is just the student says, well, when I see fruit, I eat it. It's like finders keepers, losers weepers. Like, no, that's not how we act around here. And so, yeah, you would consider this person to bear some moral responsibility, to blame, okay, for what he's done. All right. It's not a huge, massive moral infraction, but it's something blameworthy, we think. But now again, how different is this case really from the case in which it was a bird rather than another human being who was eating your fruit? I mean, after all, this person here, he's not acting simply on instinct alone. He's acting on his desires, his beliefs, right? His values or lack of values. Okay, he's acting out of his nature. He has a certain nature, right? Certain disposition, certain temperament, certain worldview, and he's acting on that. But where did he get that worldview? Where did he get that nature? Where did he get that character, that bad character, as the case may be? Well, ultimately, it's he, like any other organism, is a product of his genes and his environment. Right? He was born with certain genes into a certain environment, and things just went from there. All right, according to a scientific worldview, a more or less strictly deterministic way. And so, if you think about it, it's hard to see how the student who ate your fruit had any more say in what character he possesses than the bird had a say in what instincts it possessed. So just as the bird had no say. The bird didn't get to choose its nature. It didn't get to choose its genes. It didn't get to choose which nest it would be born in, right? Which part of the world. It didn't get to choose its genes. It didn't get to choose its environment. Well, the bird is just a product of its genes and environment. Therefore, we don't hold the bird morally responsible for its actions. Well, likewise, the student is nothing more than a product of its, in this case, his genes and his environment, neither of which he has any control over. Therefore, by the same reasoning, it seems as though we shouldn't hold the student morally responsible for eating your fruit. We should merely see the student as kind of a nuisance, like a bird. Okay? And there are some moral philosophers who think that this is the right way to think about it. And not just in these relatively trivial cases of petty theft, okay, but also in the gravest cases of what we normally think of as moral wrongdoing. So, for example, Adolf Hitler, right? There are some moral philosophers, there are some philosophers of mind, okay? There are philosophers who think that, well, Adolf Hitler, strictly speaking, it doesn't really make sense to think of him as having done anything wrong, right? And why is that? Well, because Hitler, he's more of a natural disaster, right? Hitler was more of a public health hazard than like a demon or a devil, okay? It's as if like a terrible virus sort of spread through Europe in the 1930s and 40s, killing millions of Jews, okay? And so Hitler's just like a very terrible virus. And so according to this sort of mindset, when you see somebody behaving badly, somebody deliberately doing harm to people, well, the right attitude to take here is not one of moral outrage. I'll say, you evil person, right? And we're going to get you back for that. No, you should take a more constructive kind of clinical view towards it and say, well, look, here's a problem here. You know, we have various problems. We have dengue, okay. We have HIV. We have earthquakes and tsunamis, and we have Hitler, okay. And so which one should we tackle first? Okay. And so you think about it, and not just for the bad stuff, also for the good stuff. Also the good stuff, right? So we normally think of certain very admirable figures, like say Mother Teresa, right? Here's a woman who sacrificed much of her life to do great good for some of the poorest of the poor. Okay. And so we normally heap praise on people like this. So, well, that's laudable. That's that's in an almost literal sense saintly. Okay. But according to the viewpoint that says, well, there's not that much difference between a human being and a bird, then Mother Teresa, in a way, she doesn't deserve to be praised. Right? She doesn't deserve to be praised any more than the sun deserves to be praised for like shining on the flowers, right? Or the rain deserves to be praised for watering the plants. So Mother Teresa, from this standpoint, she's a natural boon, okay, like the spring sunshine and rain, rather than a saint or an angel. Okay, anyway, so these are just a small sample of the kinds of questions that philosophers throughout the discipline like to discuss and try to answer. Now, having said a little bit about what philosophy is, let me address the question. Well, why study philosophy? Why study philosophy? Well, that's easy, right? You should study it just to satisfy your curiosity about these kind of questions. Okay, if you have any curiosity about these questions. Okay, so that's an easy one to answer. But now, if you ask me why major in philosophy, then my answer has to be a little bit more nuanced. Okay, I say major here, but also you can consider minoring in philosophy. Philosophy, actually, I should say, just as an aside, philosophy actually makes quite a good minor subject paired up with something else as your major. Economics in philosophy can work well. Psychology and philosophy. There's all kinds of combinations that are possible, and philosophy works well. But just focusing on this question, well, why would anyone ever do such a rash thing as major in philosophy? Okay. Well, the first thing to say here is not everyone should major in philosophy. Okay. Not everyone has an appetite for it. Not everyone has an aptitude for it. The people who tend to do best in philosophy are people who are very creative, but at the same time they have a good amount of self-discipline. Okay, so unbridled creativity doesn't get you very far in philosophy, right? In fact, in my opinion, unbridled creativity doesn't get you very far anywhere. Okay, but especially in philosophy. But at the same time, you can't do good philosophy. You can't do well in philosophy just by sticking to kind of rote, rule-bound, algorithmic kind of formulaic thinking. Okay. And so you have to have a kind of a flexibility. You have to be disciplined, but you can't demand that everything be written down in the form of simple to follow instructions. Okay. But if you are the creative type, okay, if you like creative problem solving, and you do feel that you have the required amount of self-discipline, which just basically means submitting to a certain amount of frustration when you're struggling with a philosophical idea for the first time. It can be very frustrating because it can be very difficult. But if you have the discipline to stick with it, then you might consider choosing philosophy as a major. And what I would say is this, that the best and really the only reason to choose philosophy as a major, or, in my opinion, to choose anything for your major, is that you are more interested in that subject than anything else. And here's the reason why. The reason is simple, and it's kind of long-winded there. The bottom line is this. You're more likely to excel at a subject that you enjoy for its own sake than in a subject that you're taking for some other extraneous reason. Okay? That's just a fact about human nature, right? Human beings don't like to work. Okay? Human beings are naturally lazy, including me and including you, right? And in particular, human beings find it painful to do tasks that they don't enjoy. Now, of course, we all have to do tasks we don't enjoy. That's life, okay? But here, for this period of this window of 3 or 4 years, right, ahead of you right now, you have some more than usual say over what you're going to be taking up your time with, okay? And so if you select a major in a subject, be it philosophy, be it economics, be it anything else, okay, that you really enjoy, that you find, wow, that just really kind of like engages you, right? Something that you just enjoy for its own sake, then you're going to have a lot easier time working hard. Working hard on that's going to be much less painful than putting your nose to the grindstone in some subject that you're just doing out of some, I don't know, filial piety or whatever the reason may be. Okay. So I would say that, yeah, that if you have any interest in philosophy at all, the thing to do is to check out the Introduction to Philosophy module. It's offered every semester. I'm the lecturer for it. And in that module, we cover a lot of ground, big, wide areas of philosophy. And if you take that module and you find that it piques your interest, then you might consider taking some further modules. Maybe you'll even consider majoring, but that's not necessary. Okay. On the other hand, if you take the intro module and you find that it's not your cup of tea, well, then you know. You tried it. I try to make it at least entertaining, so it's not a dead loss for you. Okay. So, yeah, and I think that's all I have to say today. Thank you.